So I want to be honest with you guys at the outset of this video, and that's that I kind of want to add a qualifier of sorts, I guess is what I really mean to say at the beginning of this video before I get to my main points about Michigan's offense headed into the 2026 college football season. And that is that I'm one who's constantly, and you guys will get to know this as you follow the channel, and I would hope that you would here at Darren Talks Ball. We appreciate the support. I'm constantly checking my biases. I'm trying to always think, am I buying into this a little too much? Is my status as a fan of this team kind of influencing the way that I see things? Am I seeing things that I just want to see because I want to have hope? I guess what I'm saying is I try to be as objective as possible because as fans, I frankly think that's what you deserve. And also, I think that means something. I think that means something about this channel because you'll know when I really buy into something, when I really buy into an aspect of a team or a quality of a team, or I really think that a team in any given year has a good chance at doing something great, well, you'll know that I actually mean it. And I'm not out here, you know, making clickbait videos for the sake of collecting views and gaining support. I want to be honest with you guys. So I just wanted to say that before we really get into the main talking points of this video because, well, I think I'm pretty hopeful and optimistic about the Michigan offense heading into 2026, which is obviously the main topic of this video. The other day I got curious. I watched some Utah film from the previous season from 2025. I watched Utah play BYU, watched Utah play Texas Tech, some of the better teams on their schedule. And granted, they didn't win those games, but played fairly well through the duration of each of those games, I would say, offensively. Also watched some Devin Dampier highlights. Just wanted to see what that offense really looked like when it was clicking. And obviously wanted to just get familiar with the playbook and play style and philosophy of one Jason Beck, who of course was a longtime BYU assistant and then came to Utah and coached their offense for just one season, but was a very successful season in terms of offensive production. And that's what kind of got me going. That's what kind of got me going down this rabbit hole of research that I ended up going down that ultimately led to me making this video. A lot of people, I think, don't know or are unaware of the fact that Jason Beck's offense at Utah last season was incredibly productive. And I guess that would be my first point if this was a video. You know, I was thinking of titles for this video in ways that I could get people into watching. I will admit, I and most YouTube creators, we engage in a little of the clickbait trickery. I was thinking of, titling this video something like 5 reasons why Michigan football will be elite in 2026 or something like that. And I still might even title it something like that. Who knows? Maybe this is my first of the 5 points or first of the 6 points or however many points I end up making. It's that Jason Beck's offense, with objectively less talent than what he'll have at his hands at the University of Michigan last season, was one of the most efficient offenses in the entire country. And you might be saying, Darren, well, that was in a lesser conference against lesser opponents. Well, I looked at the opponent adjusted metrics, and even by the opponent adjusted metrics, this offense was pretty damn good. Jason Beck, in one season at Utah, one and only season at Utah, had them finishing 18th in offensive SP plus and 8th in game on paper's adjusted EPA per play. That's the opponent adjusted EPA per play. 8th in the top 10 in one of the most important efficiency metrics you'll find, one of the most accurate efficiency metrics out there in college football. They were also 19th in yards per play and 12th in offensive success rate, and we know that's far more productive than what Michigan has been offensively in the last couple of seasons. In fact, last season Utah had a better opponent adjusted EPA per play rate than the following teams: Indiana, national champion Indiana, who came in at 11th, Ole Miss, we all think of Lane Kiffin and his high-powered offenses when we think of offensive college football. Ole Miss, who came in at 15th, Notre Dame, who came in at 24th, and Oregon, who came in at 25th. And just to focus more on Jason Beck as he moves over to Michigan, I think it's a really important thing to note that it's one thing to look at the success of previous stops. It's one thing to look at the success of previous offenses that he has coached. Another thing you have to do is you have to look at the current roster, the current makeup of the current roster, the personnel, I guess is what I'm saying, and really consider whether it's a great fit for the system that Jason Beck wants to coach or not. Well, I think anyone out there watching would understand that Jason Beck is one who, unlike previous coaches at the University of Michigan, those who shall not be named, or at least be named as infrequently as possible, Jason Beck likes to run his quarterback. And what does Michigan have at quarterback? Well, they have a running quarterback. They have a very good running quarterback from what we've seen when he has done it at times, and we certainly saw it throughout his high school career as he became the number one rated player overall in his recruiting class, one of the few quarterbacks who has ever been held in that regard. So between the quarterback and other aspects of the offense, I think the personnel here really fits what Jason Beck likes to do. Speaking of personnel, kind of a subtle thing going on with the offensive line, which we'll maybe talk about a little bit more in depth right here. Evan Link moves to guard. And I know that Evan Link was a very polarizing figure when he played tackle for this team in the last couple of seasons. Gave up some sacks, had some miscues in some games, had an up and down 2025 after a not so great 2024. But when you look at Jason Beck's offense, one of the things that stood out to me was the use of misdirection, and not just the use of misdirection in the pre-snap with motioning wide receivers and moving tight ends in and out, or moving running backs out into, the slot and things like that. But it was also misdirection with movement along the offensive line, pulling guards, pulling tackles, really getting that offensive line moving in one direction and having the running back or the quarterback or even wide receiver on like a jet sweep or whoever's running the football run in kind of the opposite direction. And then also running things like counter, typical stuff you'd see from any college offense, power, plays where the guard is going to be pulling quite a bit. Well, one thing we do know about Evan Link, just like most college tackles, is in order to play college tackle, you have to be fairly athletic. And I think Evan Link actually sliding into a position at guard where you're required to move around a little bit more, to pull, to find guys in the open field to block, I think he might actually low-key have a good season this season. Obviously, you can't run the football without a good offensive line. We all know that. That's not anything novel or new. That's fundamental football. It's not anything that's going to change about the game anytime soon. And between Link, Frazier, Gardnera, Afobe, and Sprague, which looks to be the starting lineup so far, Michigan has a pretty solid offensive line to move the football consistently and efficiently. And based on those metrics from Jason Beck's offense last season, I think they'll be able to do that in his system. The personnel just fits really well. And just to get back to Bryce Underwood for a minute, I want to touch on this here because I've touched on it on other channels and other interviews I've done, and even just talking with friends at work around the water cooler. One low-key thing about Bryce Underwood that I think a lot of people forgot, or a lot of people, bought into the hype for him on and kind of overlooked, was the fact that, in all honesty, he was a bit more of a project than some people thought. Some people had the idea that he would come in and be more productive than he was last season, and now that's part and parcel to the coaching problems that Michigan had last season, part and parcel to a new offensive coordinator coming in who, I think, unlike Jason Beck, didn't quite have the systems fit for the personnel that the team had ultimately in one Chip Lindsey. And let's face it, Bryce Underwood was handcuffed by a college coach who refused to use his greatest strengths, which is running the football. Bryce Underwood, low key, if you look at the stats, had a very, very similar stat line, which I know was terrible, by the way. His completion percentage was somewhere around only like 57 or 58%. He threw nearly as many interceptions as he did touchdowns, etc., etc. His yards per attempt weren't that high, neither were his yards per completion. But go back and look at Vince Young's freshman stats. Vince Young, by the way, played at Texas as a true freshman as well. A quarterback that I think we can all agree Bryce Underwood has been compared to ad nauseum. Go back and look at Cam Newton. Cam Newton wasn't a starter earlier in his career, but he played 5 or 6 games in his first year at Florida. Go back and look at other quarterbacks who are of similar style and fit well into a similar kind of offense that Bryce Underwood does. They actually all have very similar stats in their freshman years. Quarterbacks like Bryce Underwood are guys that you depend on the athleticism and the running ability early in their college careers, and then you wait for that arm to really develop. Now, he has a great arm already, but you wait for it to develop kind of between the ears, the ability to read the defenses, the ability to know when and where to fit the ball into certain windows, and to get timing down with your receivers. Sharon Moore and Company, I just mentioned that I wasn't going to name him, and I just named him, so that's on me. Sharon Moore and Company missed that fundamental truth about a quarterback like Bryce Underwood. You run them earlier in their career, you let them develop their arm, and by the time they're a junior or senior, they're ready to take over college football. Kyle Whittingham and Jason Beck, I think, fully understand the type of quarterback Bryce Underwood is. And they will run things like midline read. They will run things like quarterback power, quarterback bash, letting him scramble, running zone read, things like that. And that's going to be a big aspect of this offense. And therefore, I think it'll be pretty damn efficient. We also, of course, have to talk about one Jordan Marshall. This moves on to, I think, my 4th point now, if I'm counting. Jason Beck, personnel fit, offensive line, Bryce Underwood. Maybe this is my 5th. I've lost count. I'm not great at math. There is a reason why I'm doing this and not teaching astrophysics at MIT. But it doesn't take an astrophysicist to figure out the fact that Jordan Marshall is a great running back. In fact, I'd argue the best in the Big Ten. After all, the man ran for 932 yards on 150 attempts last season, averaging 6.2 yards per attempt, by the way, which was tied for 3rd best in the conference in the Big Ten Conference. Arguably, and in my humble opinion, the best conference in college football. He was 3rd best in that statistic behind only Justice Haynes and Noah Whittington, 2 of the best running backs in all of college football last season. And oh, by the way, Jordan Marshall was a red shirt freshman. With Bryce Underwood running the football, with those kind of read option concepts being present in this offense, and with an offensive line that figures to improve, especially with a new offensive line coach, which is a massive upgrade, Jordan Marshall's only going to have more running lanes open and available to him. Linebackers, defensive ends, those who are responsible for setting the edge, those who are responsible for filling certain gaps, are now suddenly going to have to account for the fact that Bryce Underwood may keep the ball for himself and run. And what does that do? That opens up space for your running back, and Jordan Marshall, as we've seen throughout previous seasons in the open space, is always a threat to score. But this Michigan offense, unlike previous seasons, and this is why I'm high on them going into 2026, is a much more complete offense coming into the season. You know, in previous seasons, even in 2023, because I don't think Cornelius Johnson or Roman Wilson were, you know, the high-end prospects ultimately that won Andrew Marsh's good to great college wide receivers, won this team a national championship, will forever, you know, adore them as college football players. But even in 2023, when we talked about the offense, we talked about the quarterback, the offensive line, Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards, and Colston Loveland, and we kind of stopped there because we knew the wide receiver room had limitations. Well, I'm here to say the wide receiver room no longer has those limitations because Andrew Marsh is a true X wide receiver that can run an entire route tree. And I think people don't really talk about that with him. Watching more film on last season, even watching the spring game when he was out there for a bit, it's nice to see a wide receiver for Michigan football that isn't a just one-dimensional guy, isn't just a Roman Wilson type guy that is either going to, run a screen and try to pick up some yards with his feet, or is going to try to stretch the field with his speed and try to get open downfield. Roman Wilson wasn't much of a hitch runner. He wasn't much of a crossers runner. He wasn't out there running whip routes or anything like that. Stop and goes weren't his thing. Sluggo wasn't really his thing. Corner routes weren't really his thing. Andrew Marsh can run all of those. And it's amazing given the fact that he's a pure, true sophomore. In fact, of note, Andrew Marsh last season, well, I'll get into his stats first because we got into his stats with Jordan Marshall. He had 45 receptions for 651 yards. But here's the kicker. Here's the thing that's really interesting with Andrew Marsh. Believe it or not, guys, he had more yards per reception by a couple tenths of a yard, albeit, but still had more yards per reception, which was 19th best in the Big Ten Conference among all active wide receivers. He had more of those than Jeremiah Smith. Which, to be fair, Jeremiah Smith was frequently catching screens in the Ryan Day offense, which kind of killed his average. But I kind of found that stat rather interesting. Andrew Marsh provides a dimension to this offense that I don't think it's seen in quite some time. A much more complete offense than we've seen in recent years, with a quarterback who we'd all like to think, with a new quarterback's coach, with much better coaching staff overall, will improve in the passing game and in getting Andrew Marsh the football over the course of the season. And lastly, I guess this is kind of my last point on why I think Michigan's offense will be successful in 2026. I got to shout out my guy, Zach Marshall. I don't know if he's gotten enough love this offseason, but Zach Marshall, maybe I'll pat myself on the back here just a little bit if I can, if I'm allowed to, if that's okay with you guys. I really liked Zach Marshall coming out of high school. And I think he was a little bit of an underrated recruit. If I remember right, he was kind of in that high 3-star, low 4-star area. And he's been on campus for a few years now. He's had to wait behind some guys. In fact, Hogan Hansen was kind of primed to take over ahead of Jordan Marshall. Or excuse me, Zach Marshall. I'm going to make a mistake all season with all these Marshes and Marshalls. This is going to happen. Zach Marshall was recruited around the same time or just a little bit after Colston Loveland, et cetera, et cetera. So, and of course, I'm blanking on names now, but the tight end that started last season was favored ahead of him as well. He kind of disappeared in the tight end room for a while, but he did what a lot of Michigan tight ends do. He developed. He got stronger. He got faster. And admittedly, he's not athletic as a Colston Loveland. He's not, Marlon Klein is his name, by the way. He's not as speedy and doesn't have the hands quite as good a hands as Marlon Klein. He's a little stiffer in his route running. There's not the kind of the beauty and the flow to it that you get with a Colston Loveland. But he is a damn good tight end. And I think in a system that maybe wants to use a few more wide receivers occasionally, that the coaching staff has talked a lot about going into 11 personnel more often. Zach Marshall is a fine tight end to be your only tight end out there because he can do everything. He can block a little bit if you want to run, the spread option run game with only the 5 offensive linemen and 1 tight end in there. You're not in 12 personnel or anything like that. He can play receiver, get downfield. He can catch the football. He's kind of a discount, or I'll even say it. I think this season he can be just as good as Eric All. He really, really reminds me a lot of Eric All. Not any kind of physical stats or attributes in terms of height or weight that really stand out with him. He's not super athletic. He's not super fast, but he's a intelligent football player, a tough football player, and kind of fits the mold of your classic Michigan tight end. So that's really going to do it, guys. Those are my points, my 7 or 8 points, or however many of those ended up being, as to why Michigan football will have, I'll say, a borderline elite offense in 2026. I think they can easily be in the top 15 of offensive SP plus and adjusted EPA per play, and dare I even say it, they may finish in the top 10. That's kind of crazy to say given the competition they have to play. But again, I'm trying to be as objective as possible here. I'm trying to kind of pump the brakes, but I just keep seeing evidence that points to this team having a pretty great offense in 2026. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Please subscribe, follow along the channel. We plan on doing much more Michigan football content this time around on Darren Talks Ball. So if you're a Michigan fan, definitely do subscribe. We'd really appreciate it. And join the Discord. It'll be pinned in the comments below. And until next time, as always, be kind to other people out there.